Shalom, and welcome to Light of the Hill Ministries. At today's study, we will be continuing in Genesis. If you want to follow along, I will be posting this in the comment box below. Now, under the teaching. And Abram went up from Mizraim into the south, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. And Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been in the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the slaughter place, which he had made there at first. There Abram called on the name of Yahweh. Now Lot, who was with Abram, who also had flocks and herds and tents, the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were great, so that they could not dwell together. There was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of livestock. And at the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelt in the land. Then Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not all the land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Mitzrayim as you go towards Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the plains of the Jordan, and Lot moved east. Thus they separated from each other, Abram dwelling in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelling in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent as far as Sedom. But the men of Sedom were evil and sinned before Yahweh, exceedingly so. And after Lot had separated from him, Yahweh said to Abram, "Now lift up your eyes, and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I shall give to you and your seed forever. That I shall make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the dust of the earth, then your seed also could be counted. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you." So Abraham moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth tree of Mamre, which were in Hebron, and built a slaughter place there to Yahweh. Genesis 13, verses 1 through 18. As was previously said, Abraham left Mizraim, and in verses 3 through 4, we see that he returned to the starting place between Bethel and Ai, where he had established the location for slaughter. And once more he called on the name of Yahweh. Here it is clear that Abraham had learned a valuable lesson and would have called the name of Yahweh while offering the sacrifice of repentance, confession, and thanksgiving. The Hebrew word that is translated as up comes from the root word Allah, Strong's H5927, meaning to go up, ascend, climb, approach, go. A derivative of this root word is the word that is used for the phrase whole burnt offering, which is the root word olah, Strong's H5930, which means whole burnt offering, ascent, staircase, stairway. The olah offering represents total submission to Yahweh, just as Messiah offered his body as an olah offering, as an acceptable act of devotion before Yahweh. We must similarly offer our bodies as a daily sacrifice. We must devote our entire lives to the service and worship of Yahweh. Despite going down to Mizraim, Abraham learned his lesson and then went up from Mizraim, symbolizing a complete withdrawal from the world and its enticing lust of the flesh. This chapter 13 teaches us a valuable lesson about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, which are not of Elohim. Because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. 1 John 2, verse 16. And by all accounts, we see that now how Abraham was not motivated by the flesh, but rather by Yahweh's promise. Abraham may have failed the previous test, but he passed the next one, which was one of lust for things like riches. Instead, he would be a peacemaker between him and his nephew Lot. The problem between Abraham and Lot was not one of land, famine, or wealth, but of the heart. Lot's heart had become focused on wealth and worldly success since Mizraim, whereas Abraham only wanted to please Yahweh. It was bad enough that they were arguing, but the pagan people of the land were watching and listening. When believers argue, their testimony of Yahweh suffers. Rather, as the psalmist says, it is far better to have unity among brethren. See how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. Psalms 133, verse 1. Unity is fragrant and fruitful in the spirit of Yahweh, but disunity turns that fragrance into a stench and a garden into a desert. Lot is an example of someone who looked to the flesh and followed what he could see rather than relying on Yahweh. The world's wisdom and wealth may appear to be satisfying at first, but they will ultimately disappoint. Abraham lived in Israel for Yahweh and others, not for himself, but in Mizraim he lived for himself. When Abraham returned to Yahweh's slaughter place in Canaan, he put Yahweh first and gave Lot a choice where to live. Now the true believer in Messiah walks in the same way that Yahushua did, disregarding his own rights and gladly giving up his life for the sake of others. He did, according to Paulus, doing not at all through selfishness or self-conceit, but in humility considered others better than yourselves. Each one should look not only for his own self-interest, but also for the interest of others. For let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yahushua, who being in the form of Elohim, did not regard equality with Elohim a matter to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men. And having been found in a fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, death even of a stake. Philippians 2, verses 3 through 8. In contrast, Lot was not serving others, but rather his own self-interest. Instead of looking to Yahweh, he looked to the plains of the Jordan and came to halt there. And herein lies the Lot's lesson. The eyes see what the heart loves. We either see Yahweh and turn to love him, or we see the world and turn to love it. Abraham could take Lot out of Mizraim, but not Mizraim out of Lot. With Lot and many like him, the outcome determines, or the outlook determines the outcome. Abraham's gaze was fixed on Yahweh's set-apart city. He saw the coming king and went on to walk with Yahweh and receive the blessing. Yahushua mentions this when he says, "Your father Abraham was glad that he should see my day, and he saw it and did rejoice." John 8, verse 56. Lot was fixated with the worldly cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. of the man who lived in them, and he was eventually entrapped by them and had to be rescued from danger and death. As a result, a schism developed between Lot and Abraham. And Abraham had about 300 manservants who could arm for battle. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born into his house and went and pursued as far as Dan. Genesis 14, verse 14. This gives you an idea of the size of the crowd accompanying Abraham. Lot was probably in roughly the same position, because the land was simply too small for all of them to graze their cattle and sheep together. Conflict arose between Lot's servant and Abraham's servant, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. And at the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelt in the land. Genesis 13, verses 6 through 7. Abraham called Lot and said to him, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not all the land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I go to the left." Genesis 13, verses 7 through 8. Abraham and Lot parted on good terms, and one went with his family, flocks, and herds to one place and settled there, while the other went to another, preventing further animosities and contentions. Abraham teaches us to be peacemakers, and that while there will be schisms between brothers, we should seek peace even in the midst of those schisms. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere, before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Mitzrayim as you go towards Seir. So Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot moved east. Thus they separated from each other, Abraham dwelling in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelling in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent as far as Sedom. But the men of Sedom were evil and sinned before Yahweh, exceedingly so. Genesis 13, verses 10 through 13. So Sodom and Gomorrah were like the Garden of Eden, and Lot looked down at the lush tropical area, decided to move down that way. So Lot begins to travel towards Sodom, drawn in some way by this evil city. There does appear to be a certain allure to sin. Sin makes it appear very appealing, or Satan makes it very appealing. As the proverb goes, there's a way which seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 14, verse 12. So what is the way that appears right to man that leads to death? Is it straight, narrow, or is it broad? Yeshua tells us, enter in through the narrow gate, because the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. There are many who enter in through it, because the gate is narrow and the way is hard pressed, which leads to life. There are few who find it. Matthew 7, verses 13 to 14. Abraham chose the narrow way of obedience to Yahweh. He made the hard choice. And Lot chose the way that leads to destruction. It was most likely a trying experience. Lot became like a son to Abraham. He adored him, and saying goodbye is never easy. And it's always more difficult to be the one that is left. It's always easier to go than to be left behind. And seeing them go always leaves you with an empty sinking feeling as they fade from your life. And Abraham and Lot had been traveling together for years, probably for 50 years. They were very close. Now he sees Lot takes off, and his heart must be aching. Yahweh now intervenes to comfort him, saying, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I shall give to you and your seed forever. And I shall make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could count the dust of the earth, then your seed also could be counted. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you." Genesis 13, verses 14 through 17. Now Yahweh invited Abraham to lift up his eyes and see what Yahweh had to offer in terms of fulfilling his promise to him, making him the father of many nations. Lot chose a piece of land that he eventually lost, but Yahweh gave Abraham the entire land that he and his descendants still own. And where Lot said, "I will take," Yahweh said, "I will give." Abraham learned to receive what Yahweh had given. Abraham's discipline in going down to Mizraim had taught him to respect boundaries, so Yahweh could now trust him with new boundaries his children would inherit. So he showed him all the land he and his children would inherit. And because we trust the Messiah, we have the same right to inherit as Abraham. All that is required is that we have to have faith and to do everything he commands in the Torah and draw on his wisdom. The word of Yahweh tells you how rich you are, and hearing and doing his command as you walk in Messiah is the key that unlocks the vault so that you can claim your inheritance. All that is required is to lift one's feet and walk. We are to have his kingdom rules govern our lives wherever we go. So we recognize that the Torah is our inheritance, and we take possession of it by walking it out fully in Messiah. Every place on which the sole of your feet treads, I have given you as I have spoken to Moshe. Joshua 1, verse 3. Abraham then walks to the terebinth trees of Mamre, where he pitches his tent and builds an altar for Yahweh. So Abraham moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron. I built a slaughter place there to Yahweh. Genesis 13, verse 18. Mamre in Hebrew is Strong's number H4471, means strength or fatness. So we can certainly see how Abraham had grown in strength under the teaching of the Master Yahweh of hosts. Even after a loss, Yahweh still gives us strength. You can be sure that on that promise, as long as we stay under the shelter of his wings, as Yeshayahu, or as he's commonly called, Isaiah, tells us. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting Elohim Yahweh, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, but to those who have no might he increases strength. Even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who wait on Yahweh renew their strength. They rise up the wings like eagles. They run and are not weary. They walk and do not faint. Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 31. The mighty one of comfort gives us strength under this tree, and we can trust that he will never lose his strength. As long as we wait on Yahweh, we can gain his understanding, his power, and his might here. These terebinth trees of memory were in Hebron, and in Hebrew, Hebron is Strong's H2275, means association. It comes from the primitive root Habar, and is Strong's H2266, which means to unite, be joined, alliance made, allied, attached. The site of the great tree of Mamre was a well-known place of Canaanite worship, where people went to buy and sell goods and make various sacrifices to their mighty ones. There are many stories about these trees and religious practices that take place there. So it's significant when Abraham moved nearby, he built an altar to acknowledge his relationship with Yahweh. He did this right where the people gathered to worship the other mighty ones. He was demonstrating who his mighty one was and who he had joined, formed an alliance with, and was attached to, which was Yahweh. So too, we should demonstrate to those around us who we have joined with, allied with, and are attached to, and hopefully it is Yahweh. Let us pray. Yahweh, Almighty One, nothing is too hard for you. So please empower us through your Spirit to live a life that is pure and give us strength when we are weak. Be our comfort when we have suffered loss. Show us the new boundaries you have for us. We say we need your power and might as we walk through this journey in life. We say you never slumber or sleep, and we trust in you and hide under the shelter of your wings. Under the trees of memory, we learn from you. We say we are joined with you, allied with you, and we can only be attached to you through the blood of your Son, Yahushua. And for that, we say thank you for sending him. And now, may we simply walk as he walked. Amen and hallelujah. We will continue on Abraham's journey and learn the lessons he learned in the next teaching, Yahweh willing. If you like this teaching, please comment, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And click on the notification button to be notified of the next teaching. Yahweh bless and shalom to your homes.